Hey guys, how all of you beautiful people are doing? And yes, this is a new series, Accidental Gamer Hero. I accidentally saved the world and was granted 3 wishes when I died. Easy. First wish to reincarnate in the Naruto universe, and second is to reincarnate with the gamer ability. Third wish, I'll save it for later. /OC. So let's start without any delay. Zabuza's thoughts were interrupted when 2 senbon needles suddenly flew into his neck before he slumped forward and fell to the ground motionless. Kakashi narrowed his eyes at the sight. A figure donning a Chunnin mask with Kirigakyo's symbol engraved on the forehead appeared on the branch of a tree. Thank you very much. I have been tracking Momokai Zabuza for some time, waiting for this chance to finally take him down. The figure spoke with a gentle tone as he bowed politely. The copy ninja nodded. By your mask, I see that you are a Chunnin from Kirigakyo. Is that right? Impressive. You are well informed. Haku answered, though he could feel some hesitation starting to seep in. He had decided to jump in at that moment because he realized that his master's chances of survival were very quickly diminishing. Taking down a shinobi who was about to defeat Zabuza would prove to be a tall order, so Haku decided to put him into a near-death state and utilize deception to get them both out safely. This was a backup plan formulated by Zabuza, in the event of his defeat in battle. Haku did not relish the idea of injuring his master, but it was the only way to prevent them from getting captured or killed. However, why isn't he checking Zabuza-sama's vitals? Haku realized during their short interaction. Kakashi looked calm, which could be explained away from his years of experience dealing with foreign shinobi. However, Kakashi was not approaching Zabuza's corpse to confirm his death for some odd reason. Could the Konoha shinobi be exhausted and thus lacked any energy to even attempt to confirm Zabuza's death? Or was he that naive to fully believe the faked at face value? Impossible, someone who had laid such an intricate ambush would never be so foolish. Then could Gozu and Mezu have betrayed them? Those 2 were loyal to Zabuza, but there were always methods to make them talk. His dread and trepidation were violently suppressed as Haku reappeared next to Zabuza's body and picked it up. Theories and conjectures were good and all, but his priority right now was to get his master out of this dangerous situation. Excuse me, but I must deal with the remains. There are many secrets in his body that must not be allowed to get into the wrong hands. Haku recited, his lines carefully rehearsed. As he held up a hand seal to perform a shunshin, his actions were interrupted. Hold on. Kakashi spoke, holding up a hand. Would you mind meeting my students? It's not every day they get to meet a Chunnin. And judging by your voice and appearance, you must be about their age. I think it would be good for them to meet someone so talented but is the same age as them. Maybe they will get inspired. Haku sweated. That will be difficult. I am in a rush to return to Kiri. If there's nothing else, I will bid you farewell. Kakashi smiled before taking slow, measured steps towards the pair. What's with the hurry? Oh, are you in such a rush that you forgot that you are supposed to deal with the corpse immediately, on the spot, so that there's no room for error? Isn't that right? Haku. The Hyoton user froze before immediately forming a single-handed seal that created hundreds of needles made of ice which immediately flew towards Kakashi. In response, the copy ninja formed a hand seal which allowed for his chakra to explode out of his paws, creating a makeshift armor of chakra that, while not durable, was more than enough to deflect the flying senbon. One-handed seals. At such a young age too. What a horrifying talent. If he is left alive, he will be a terrifying enemy of Konoha. I have to kill him right now. With that in mind, Kakashi rushed forward while forming hand seals. Like I said, you should stay and meet my students, Haku. Kaiten, Fire Dragon Blast. A stream of fire molded into the shape of a dragon was sent flying towards the pair, the intensity of the flames scorching even the dirt underneath it. Before the impact, there was flash of blue, but a great explosion instantly covered it up. Boom! The smoke and dust from the explosion obscured Kakashi's vision for a moment, but he wasn't supremely confident that the A-ranked jutsu had managed to finish the job. And as expected, as the smoke and dust cleared, the only thing that remained after the explosion were large chunks of ice that were rapidly melting even with the dense Hyoton chakra saturated within. Kakashi looked around for any further signs of his opponent before putting back his headband to cover his Sharingan once he was convinced the missing nin and his apprentice managed to escape. It was unfortunate that he couldn't kill the both of them. The Hyoton user was stronger than what the Demon Brothers had reported under their interrogation. If he was still in the Anbu, he might have chased them down relentlessly to prevent such a dangerous enemy from threatening the village. However, right now his students and the mission were the priority. Furthermore, he was positive he left such heavy injuries on Zabuza that the man would be out of commission for a couple months at least. Enough time for the bridge to finish its construction. With that, Kakashi turned and ran back to his students, albeit slightly weary from the heavy consumption of chakra. So that's it. Zabuza and his apprentice didn't even return and attack again after that. I commented in disbelief after Sasuke finished recounting the wave mission. It was almost completely different from how I remembered it going down in canon. First off, the Demon Brothers had actually been interrogated after being defeated and captured by Team 7. This gave the team from Konoha valuable information about the upcoming attack, which allowed them plenty of time to plan and lay a trap. Kakashi then single-handedly defeated Zabuza, which forced Haku to intervene. However, as the Chunnin had already been informed about Haku's existence beforehand, he was not deceived by the performance. Though they managed to escape in the end, the severe injuries Kakashi left on Zabuza made sure he could not recover in time to assault Team 7 again. Which meant there was no climatic showdown at the bridge where Sasuke rescued Naruto by taking the flurry of Senbon from Haku, and consequently the bond and friendship between the two protagonists forged from the encounter did not occur. Sasuke frowned and shrugged, no. They ran away after being defeated by Sensei. I didn't even get to see them because we were trailing quite a distance behind Sensei and the clones. The only enemies I got to face in the entire mission were the Demon Brothers and a bunch of thugs Gato sent when the bridge was almost done being built. What a waste of time. I sighed heavily, which did not go unnoticed by the Uchiha. Fine, I get it. You got to fight and defeat actual missing nin while I had to take the back seat and let my sensei handle everything. You don't have to brag. He glumly retorted in response. What? That's not whatever. My thoughts were heavy with the realization that even without my presence, my canon knowledge was being warped further and further from being recognizable. Haku and Zabuza were still alive. What did that mean in the grand scheme of things? I could not be certain. But what I was certain about was that my knowledge of the supposed future was getting more and more unreliable, the result of my intervention and its butterfly effects. Sasuke frowned at the perceived slight. "Tch, I don't care. Let's just train." Yeah, sure. I replied distractedly before perking up. "Oh right, you should start getting serious about your training. It's about time for that too. The Uchiha's eyebrow twitched. I have always been serious about training. And what are you talking about? I smiled. You don't know. The Chunin exams are coming up in a couple months and Konoha is hosting this year's exams. Since Konoha is the hosting village, chances are we will all be recommended to join the exam since it will be relatively safer here. Upon hearing my words, it looked as if a fire was lit in the boy. Heh, Chunin exams. Sounds interesting. He remarked, pretending not to be as excited as I knew he was feeling. Seriously, why is this kid such a tsund? Yeah, it will be. Not like we will be expected to pass it though. We just graduated the academy, so most likely we will be nominated to join the exam just to get experience. Of course, that only applies to the rest of you amateurs. I will definitely be rewarded with a Chunin vest once it's over. I shot him a challenging smirk. He growled, don't get cocky. I developed a new move recently, care to test it out? I chuckled in amusement, sure. Show me what you got. Though my face was all smiles, inwardly I was more than a little anxious. With the Chunin exams approaching, that also meant the arrival of another person, more dangerous than any being I had ever faced in my existence. Orochimaru, the Snake Chunnin. Worst of all, that guy had a hard-on for the Sharingan like nothing else. And unfortunately for me, I didn't just have the Sharingan, I even had the miraculous gamer body and system. Sasuke would be his target during the second stage of the exams, but I would be in 10 times the amount of danger should that terrifying monster find out about my abilities. As I followed Sasuke to the Uchiha training grounds, my gaze couldn't help but tremble at the thought of being targeted by someone like Orochimaru, a true monster in human form. Shinji sat on the edge of a roof of a particularly tall building in the village with his legs hanging freely as he watched the village gate. Throughout the past week, multiple teams from foreign villages were slowly arriving at Konoha, no doubt to participate in the Chunin exams which would be happening in a few days' time. A week ago, Asuma had informed his team that they were going to be nominated for the Chunin exams, much to Shinji's delight, even if it was a foregone conclusion really. Hinata was slightly more apprehensive, although the girl was content just following Shinji wherever he went. Shino, on the other hand, revealed no discernible emotion to the announcement, merely nodding in acknowledgement at that. And as part of his preparations for the exams, Shinji decided to conduct some reconnaissance of his competitors. Using his observe skill, Shinji was able to take note of the approximate level of strength from many of his competitors. Though he had a rough idea of who were the true standouts that would appear in this exam, there was still a possibility of unexpected outcomes as a result of his existence. The participants were largely from the surrounding shinobi villages, geographically located relatively closer to Konoha. And their levels generally ranged from 25 to 30 on average. There were, of course, a couple underwhelming participants below that range, but not many were above level 30. Shinji wouldn't claim to be an expert in inter-village politics, but he could make an educated guess that foreign villages wouldn't usually send their best and their brightest to Chunin exams hosted by villages that were not their close allies. Already, he had seen a couple genin teams from Amigakure, Kusagakure and Takegakure who were all rather underwhelming. At this point in time, Amigakure should have already been taken over, with Hanzo being overthrown by Pain, or rather, Nagato. They would likely be wanting to keep a low profile. Even sending a couple genin to Konoha's Chunin exams was likely just a form of camouflage for the Akatsuki. There was no way they were going to send actual Chunin level genins to take part in the exams so as to not attract attention. Because if these genin actually made it to the final stage of the exams, the leader of AME, who the world knew of as being Hansa, would be expected to be in attendance. From what he knew of the exams, invitations were extended to every hidden village. Although, whether or not the invited would actually send their genin to participate was a different story that heavily depended on the political climate at that time. Iwa, for instance, a long-time and bitter enemy of Konoha, would never deign to participate in any events hosted by Konoha and vice versa. They would likely be worried that Konoha might try to do something to their shinobi while they were in their village, and Konoha similarly thought the same. The same went for Kumo, which, because of what was now known as the Hyuga affair that occurred a couple years prior, had a sour relationship with Konoha. Not to mention their hidden village was simply so far away geographically that it would take weeks of travel just to arrive at Konoha. Being so far removed from their village was a safety issue, especially when they were deep in what could be considered enemy territory. Kiri, on the other hand, was undergoing a civil war. They were not in a position to be participating in something as frivolous as another village's Chunnin exams even if they wanted to. Teams from the same village arrived together in a large group. Normally, silent alarms would have been triggered when Konoha patrols sighted so many foreign shinobi converging on the village all at once. Needless to say, those alarms were not triggered. However, it would be foolish to assume Konoha's security were at all relaxed because of the upcoming Chunnin exams. Rather, they were tightened precisely because of the sudden influx of foreign agents. The entire village was placed in heightened alert, with amplified patrols concentrated around the restricted areas within Konoha. Shinji suddenly sat up straighter when a large group of Suna shinobi entered the village gates. There were slightly over 30 Suna shinobi of varying ranks. It looked like 30 of them were genin while the rest were their chaperones. Of course, only 3 of them caught Shinji's eye, with especially one of them of particular interest. Gaara LV45. HP 15200/15200. CP 346000/3460000. Gaara is a genin of Tsunagakure and the youngest son of the Yondaime Kazekage. Because of his status as the Jinchu Uriki of the Ichibi Shukaku, he is widely feared as a monster by the villagers of Suna. Though he appears outwardly calm, Gaara is deeply unbalanced and, in certain situations, driven mad with bloodlust as a result of Shukaku's influence. He hates other people for existing, believing that so long as they are alive, they are a threat to his own existence. His purpose is therefore to kill anyone who is strong or whom he perceives as similar to himself, as only by killing them can he assert his own existence. He has no opinion of you. Gaara is stronger than you. As expected, a Jinchu Uriki's HP and CP were simply off the charts, Shinji observed. However, compared to Naruto, who was at the moment only level 32 and yet possessed a larger chakra capacity than Gaara, it only goes to show the difference in power between the 9-tailed fox and the 1-tailed tanuki. His CP was also constantly fluctuating, presumably due to the cost of maintaining his powerful defensive sand ninjutsu, but is immediately regenerated from his natural chakra recovery. The other odd point was Gaara's comparatively low HP, which was unlike the overwhelming vitality of Kyuubi's Jinchu Uriki. Shinji couldn't help but wonder how he would fare against Gaara in a battle. If it was in the context of the Chunnin exam finals, where they were to fight in the middle of an arena under the watchful gaze of the entire audience, he would undoubtedly lose. With his self-imposed restrictions on revealing his Sharingan to the world, as well as the oddity of his gamous body that was sure to catch the eye of the perceptive, Shinji would have to fall back on the rest of his arsenal. much of which lacked the explosive power necessary to penetrate Gaara's defenses. The highest-ranked offensive ninjutsu in his repertoire consisted only of Kaiten and Futon B-ranked ninjutsu. The best solution to Gaara's ultimate defense he could think of was using his wind chakra and its sharp, penetrative nature. In a situation where Shinji could fight Gaara away from prying eyes, however, the results would be more uncertain. From what he could remember, the Uchiha clan's Sharingan was able to place tailed beasts under limited control with their ocular genjutsu. The details of which were either never explained or perhaps Shinji just couldn't remember, but it was a definite possibility. It was also possible that he required the advanced form of the Sharingan, the Mangekyo, in order to control the Baijua, but it wasn't exactly something he could test out. Regardless, Shinji did not feel comfortable placing such a large amount of faith in an ability that was only a maybe. He much rather preferred relying on his own strength to overcome the monstrous challenges lying ahead of him. Throughout the months spent training and completing quests after graduating, his level and skills rose at a fast pace. But to Shinji, it was still slightly lacking, especially when he thought about who he might have to face during the exams. And from his experience, there was only one surefire way to greatly improve his strength in such a short amount of time. It was time to head back into the Uchiha Natural Dungeon. The Rank D Uchiha Natural Dungeon was roughly similar to the previous two dungeons I cleared. Like before, the dungeon featured undead Uchiha clansmen. Only this time around, they were fully grown adults or late teenagers that I had to kill instead. Furthermore, unlike the shambling and stumbling clumsy zombies of the Rank F dungeon, these Genin-level zombies were much more agile and strong. They still lacked the critical element that would have landed me in danger fighting so many of these creatures in such a short time frame, which was intelligence. If the monsters in the dungeon had the mental capacity to team up and work together, my life might definitely have been in peril a couple times. Fortunately, they had no such notion of teamwork. Instead, they preferred only to aggressively attack me when I wandered into their zone of hostility. The Genin-level zombies had levels that ranged from 20 to 30, and their respective combat prowess increased according to their level. Luckily they did not have jutsu in their repertoire, preferring only to attack with their limbs and teeth. With the exception of zombies with levels in the late 20s who actually wielded weapons. These weapons differed from zombie to zombie. Examples included daggers, axes, and swords of various lengths. Needless to say, the deadliness of the dungeon monsters had increased exponentially as compared to the previous dungeon, which only featured undead academy students and clumsy genin. However, my strength had also increased exponentially since the last time I entered one of these dungeons. Not only were my stats higher than before, the level of my skills, as well as my proficiency in utilizing them, had also rocketed upwards. Constant training and sparring against Asuma, a full-fledged jounin specializing in close quarters combat, had seen my combat ability similarly improving greatly since I graduated from the Shinobi Academy. Against mindless zombies who could only rely on their genin-level physical strength and dulled reflexes, it was once against a slaughter. Though the difficulty of the dungeon had increased, so too had its rewards. Putting aside the EXP gained from each the defeated zombies, which was a substantial amount, with each individual creature awarding more than 1000 EXP each, the monetary rewards were considerable as well. Each loot orb dropped by the slain zombies held ample Ryo, over 1000 each, as well as various miscellaneous items which often included the weapons they had been wielding. Which resulted in my inventory space being filled with rusty kunai, damaged swords or outright broken blades. I still had my eyes set on the weapons displayed in the Lady Smith, Meizako Granny's weapon shop. Those items may have an exorbitant price tag attached to them, but each one was more than worth its price. So saving up enough to purchase one of those if I ever found myself in the Land of Fire's capital city was a definitely goal of mine. One new standout loot that only started dropping in this rank D dungeon were potions. Minor health potion grade, uncommon. A low-quality concoction that is poorly made. When consumed, recovers 500 HP instantly. Minor chakra potion grade, uncommon. A low-quality concoction that is poorly made. When consumed, recovers 500 CP instantly. The drop rate of the potions were rather low. About 1 in 10 zombies would drop one of them. But once in a while an intermediate potion would drop as well, which recovered 1500 HP/CP instead. The health potions were distinctively bright red in color, a staple sight of just about every fantasy RPG ever, whereas the contents within the chakra potions were light blue and slightly glowing. As interesting as it was to see liquid chakra sloshing around in a bottle, I had no clue as to its production methods. Otherwise, I would definitely have tried producing them on my own. Instant CP recovery sounded extremely useful in the right circumstances. The true highlight of the dungeon, however, was the boss fight. When I entered the Uchiha clan cemetery, where the dungeon boss monster would usually reside, it was empty. That was baffling because I had scoured the entire Uchiha compound killing every single zombie before making my way to the cemetery as was my usual habit of clearing these dungeons, yet I had not seen hide nor hair of anything that resembled a boss monster. Stepping into the middle of the cemetery, however, was apparently the trigger of the boss fight. All at once, zombified arms broke through the dirt and grass of the cemetery as undead corpses burst out of the surface. There was one for every tombstone contained within the cemetery, and there were many tombstones in the graveyard. A cursory count told me that there were at least 100 of these zombies around me. I had stepped into a trap, it seemed. What's more, my skill informed me that each one of them were level 30 undead Uchiha Genin. Surrounded by over 100 of them, I quickly judged that if I bullishly tried to fight against these odds, chances were I would lose and perish. As a result, faced with imminent peril, I swiftly pulled up my status page and emptied my accumulated reserve of free stat points. My stats instantly skyrocketed. With survivability as my key priority, I brought my VIT all the way up to 200 without hesitation nor regret. Similarly, something told me that I would require greater reserves of chakra as well as speed and maneuverability to survive this ordeal. Thus, I pulled up my int to 200 as well. Although I did not have enough free stat points to do the same with my DEX, it still increased to a respectable 197, just 3 stat points shy from 200. Just like that, 154 free stat points was reduced to 0. Status page. Name, Shinji Ikrai. Age, 13. Level, 40. Next level, 14338/41000. HP, 13200/13200. CP, 13200/13200. STR, 145, plus 5. VIT, 140, 200, plus 7. DEX, 143, 197, plus 13. Int, 160, 200. Char, 35, plus 21. Points 0. Rio 1,203,775. The massive investment in stat points consequently granted me several perks as well, 4 in total as a result of my VIT going past 150 and reaching 200, DEX going past 150 and INT reaching 200. Including the INT perk I received when it had reached 150 a week ago, I ended up with 5 new perks. Greater physicality, 150 VIT. Plus 20% increase to max HP. Plus 20% increase to HP recovery rate. Minus 20% to physical damage taken. Greatly increased stamina. Lesser regeneration, 200 VIT. Increases HP recovery rate by 100%. Greater agility, 150 DEX. Plus 30% increase to movement speed. Plus 30% increase to attack speed. Greatly increased expertise in stealth, finesse and flexibility. Greater chakra sensitivity, 150 INT. Plus 40% to chakra-related skill effects. Plus 20% increase to CP recovery rate. Plus 20% increase to max CP. Minus 20% CP cost to all chakra-related skills. Mental skill proficiency, 200 INT. Increases potency of mind-related skills. Minus 20% CP cost to all mind-related skills. Both my HP and CP instantly broke past the 10,000 mark, both reaching 13,200. Because the effects of the perks stacked, my HP and CP received a 30% boost to their maximum capacity. Furthermore, my natural HP regeneration rose to a jaw-dropping 1029 every minute because, lesser regeneration, literally doubled it. Naturally recovering my HP from 0 to maximum capacity would only take a little less than 13 minutes. I was quickly reaching the level of self-regeneration possessed by an average Jinchu Yuriki. I could immediately feel the change in my body after emptying all those free stat points in my status page. The strength and vitality coursing through my veins was intoxicating while my chakra reserves seemed to be overflowing. Such an unnatural and sudden gain in strength and power for any other person might have been hazardous to their health. After all, what I had experienced was akin to a few years' worth of dedicated training for the average shinobi. The normal way a person built muscle was a complex process of breaking down muscle fiber and letting it naturally heal and grow stronger from this process. One needed time to break it down and heal over prolonged periods of time to achieve discernible growth. The same went for enlarging your chakra reserves. Yet, I had acquired strength and power that required years of training in a single instant. It was purely because of my gamous body that ensured no drawbacks to this freakishly extraordinary jump in my physical capabilities. I had little time to continue pondering over this sudden and astonishing growth as the zombies surrounding me had already started moving towards their target me. With my newly acquired strength, I was more than confident of slaughtering this horde of zombies who had ambushed me. I pulled out Kanshou and Bakuya from my inventory, my already enhanced stats receiving another boost from their item effects. The 2 short swords, one black and one white, with their curved shape glowed from the surge of chakra channeled into the metal that made up their form. This bluish layer of chakra then sharpened, as the energy wrapped around the 2 blades was transformed into wind nature chakra when I activated a skill I acquired under Asuma's tutelage. It was a skill I had yet to master, since nature transformation training took a long time to become proficient in, yet alone master. As the 2 skills, wind nature transformation, and fire nature transformation, leveled up, it became increasingly harder to increase their levels. However, my expertise in wind nature transformation was enough for me to learn and create this new skill, wind blade flow. Not satisfied with just this skill, I vigorously pumped chakra into my limbs, activating chakra enhancement. With the greater chakra sensitivity perk that increased all chakra-related skills by 40% across the board, I was eager to see the extent of my strength under this new amplification. To make up for my disproportionately lower strength, I activated Bull Strength, which increased my STR stat by a further 20%. With all of these buffs layered on me, I sprinted towards the closest zombie and swung my twin blades. Kan Shao and Bakuya sliced through the creature with ease, meeting little to no resistance even as Kan Shao cut through a Wakizashi the zombie Genin had hastily put up in defense. Magnificent. An Subarashi. With the Sharingan boosting my visual acuity in addition to my various skills enhancing my speed and strength, whirlwind steps, and power strike, respectively, I proceeded to tear through the rest of the zombie horde with surprising ease. At times when the undead Uchiha Genin congregated, I unleashed devastating Kaiten Jutsu to thin their numbers while hastily erecting barriers of wind when I found myself besieged. It took only a little over 10 minutes before the final zombie fell. A brief examination of my status showed that I received scant injuries, a few bruises and scrapes here and there when I was attacked from my blind spots, but it would only take a few minutes for my HP to naturally recover to its peak. My CP, on the other hand, was reduced to about half its maximum capacity, a consequence of my liberal usage of B-ranked jutsu and maintenance of the various buffs on myself. Killing over 100 of these level 30 undead Uchiha Genin naturally awarded a correspondingly immense sum of EXP to the point where I was able to level up another 3 times. Indeed, entering the dungeon and grinding for EXP was the fastest way for me to gain strength. It would take an all-out war in the real world for me to be able to kill so many high-leveled individuals and acquire that much EXP outside of quests. Coincidentally, there was actually a war coming my way soon enough, one that I was determined to benefit from as much as I could. The only strange thing was that no loot orbs were dropped in the process of killing the zombies, which confused me, but my doubt was instantly cleared up when a glowing purple orb suddenly appeared in the middle of the cemetery as well as an announcement from the system that entered within my sight. Congratulations! You have eliminated the boss. Rank D dungeon cleared. It seemed that the dungeon system or whatever dictated the happenings within this parallel dimension decided to give me the dropped loot from the 100 zombies all at once. With this phenomenon, I was sure that this horde of zombies was the representative boss of this dungeon. Approaching the loot orb and grabbing a hold of it, I could see what I received from slaying the boss. Loot gained happy smiley. Plus 230,160 Rio. Maniac's Cloud Snack, rare. Glass Eye of the Prophet, unique. Maniac's Cloud Snack grade, rare. A cigarette pack with 20 cigarettes. All stats slowly increase from 1% to 20% for 5 minutes as you smoke the cigarette. Effect is removed if cigarette is removed from lips for more than 5 seconds or if it is destroyed. Glass Eye of the Prophet grade, unique. User acquires the skill, clairvoyance, when equipped. Item needs to be implanted into the user's eye socket for item effect to activate. I was never a big smoker in my previous life. A couple times at parties, but never regularly. With the new item I acquired now, however, it seemed like I was about to pick it up again. I wondered if Asuma would be proud if he saw me smoking. Would he think I was imitating him? The second item on the other hand had me recoiling when I read the item description. As tempting as the skill, clairvoyance, meaning precognition or remote viewing, sounded, the idea of removing one of my eyes and shoving a glass eye in its place sounded horrendous to me. though a part of me did wonder if a night's sleep would be able to cure me of any sort of blindness if I removed an eye implant. The glass eye then popped it back out again, thanks to Gamer's body, curing all status effects. Still, I would never do something like that, right? Before I could continue pondering over the myriad possibilities the ability to see the future of which I had changed so drastically would open up, a sudden announcement from the system broke me out of my thoughts. Congratulations! The hidden boss has appeared after becoming enraged. Warning, you cannot leave the dungeon until after the hidden boss has been eliminated. Goddamn dungeon system is even changing the rules now. Out of nowhere an even bigger horde of zombies than the one I had just slaughtered came rushing into the cemetery from its sole entrance. I instantly activated all the various buffs to enhance my fighting ability, preparing myself to once more face a zombie horde. However, contrary to my expectations, the horde of zombies did not rush to drown me in a massive pile of rotting corpses and vile viscera. Instead, the creatures weirdly began climbing up on top of each other, forming a small hill of zombies that were clambering to get higher and higher, creating some sort of haphazard, undead human pyramid. But as they continued climbing and eventually started forming a gigantic humanoid shape, I realized this looked a little familiar. The top half of its massive body was vaguely humanoid, with arms, a head, and a torso, while the bottom half of its figure was just a mass of zombies clumped together. Uchiha Legion Zombie LV40. HP 150,000/150,000. CP. A writhing mass of undead Uchiha zombies that have gathered together to eliminate the nemesis of the living dead. They will stop at nothing to kill you, the one who has terrorized the pitiful restless dead, unable to peacefully pass on without getting killed by a ruthless monster. Their hatred for you who have killed countless of their kin is immeasurable. Wait, hold up, by ruthless monster did they mean me? How am I the bad guy here? Why is the system trying to make it sound like I am invading a peaceful community of farmers and peasants when they are literal zombies? What was I supposed to do, not kill zombie monsters to farm me XP and loot their valuables? And really, a legion zombie? Good grief, the system is really running out of ideas, huh? Careful or you'll get sued for copyright infringement. The hidden boss monster was colossal in size, seemingly towering over me like a skyscraper, comprised of individual zombies that looked like they were hanging on for dear life in order to create this monstrous abomination. But you know what they say, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. I would have been more threatened by hundreds of individual, high-level zombies, than this giant walking target. As interesting as it was to see the formation of such a spectacular, albeit grotesque, construct, I subscribed to the notion of strike first, strike hard, no mercy. Hence, my hands immediately flashed through hand seals. I brought my hand up to my mouth, forming an O shape with my fingers, and unleashed the accumulated fire nature chakra accumulated in my lungs. Kaiten, Fire Dragon Flame Bullet. A flood of liquid flame exploded from my mouth as I manipulated my chakra within it to shape the flames into forms of dragons that rushed forward to coil up and crash into the Titanic Legion zombie as though ramming their heads and bodies against it. The remnant, lengthy bodies of the fire dragons coiled around the target, forming a vortex made of flame and burning hot wind that was actively burning the hidden boss. I wasn't done yet, however. My hands blasted through another set of hand seals as I inhaled deeply. Photon, pressure damage. A tornado-like mass of condensed wind nature chakra was unleashed from my mouth as I slammed against my exaggeratedly inflated chest, which exploded towards the solitary flaming legion zombie. The moment the dense cloud of wind nature chakra made contact with the fiery dragons still wrapped around the monster, it exploded into an even bigger storm of fire and smoke. My mastery in nature transformation was not yet at the point of removing specific elements from the air like carbon dioxide, but amplifying the concentration of oxygen in the futon jutsu was well within my ability. This particular jutsu had been modified by me for the sole purpose of increasing the potency of the flames. In other words, its function in my repertoire was making fire burn even hotter and longer. The Legion zombie, which had only just completed its construction, gave an unearthly roar as the incandescent flames incinerated its body, a freakish amalgamation of arms, torsos and legs, its voice an unnatural cacophony of unsettling screams and unnerving shrieks. Everything about its existence was simply abnormal and seemed out of this world, even one as fantastical as the Narutoverse. Thick plumes of smoke were generated from the fire burning the Legion zombie, and its smell was unbearable. And as the smoke and fire began to subside, I could see just how much damage my strongest jutsu combination had done to the creature. The outer layer of the Legion zombie that were made up of individual zombies was charred black, and this skin of zombies began dropping off, smoking and charred beyond recognition. However, that also revealed the relatively healthy and unharmed zombies that made up the insides of the Legion zombie. Uchiha Legion Zombie LV40. HP 118,372/150,000. It was no one-hit kill, but there was definitely significant progress being made. As I readied myself for another burst of Kaiten Futon combination jutsu, I was caught off guard when a wave of zombies appeared out of nowhere, rushing in from the cemetery gates. And to my dismay and horror, these zombies that appeared started climbing up the injured Legion zombie. In front of my very sight, the HP bar of the Legion zombie began regenerating with every zombie that affixed itself into place on the giant body of the hidden boss monster. It didn't take long for the Legion zombie to completely recover to its full HP, looking as though it had not suffered even a single point of damage, making the not insignificant consumption of my own CP wasted. Seeing the Legion zombie regenerate brought pause to my actions, as I had to change my plans moving forward. If no matter how much damage I dealt, the monster could just recover by assimilating more zombies that appeared when it got injured, would it not be an unending struggle before I exhausted myself? Suddenly, the Legion zombie moved, faster than one would expect from its size and with a bizarre fluidity to its movements. The massive monstrosity sped towards me like a torrential flood, its figure briefly losing its humanoid shape as the creature disassembled itself and instead resembled a cascading tidal wave of decomposing corpses instead. Its movements actually reminded me of a certain zombie movie that featured zombies with a similar way of crashing against walls like a massive surge of water, flowing around the battlefield with the force of 1,000 waves. The Legion zombie quickly reformed back into its giant form and sent a massive fist towards me. Though I was shocked by its sudden speed and the fluidity of its motions, I still had enough wits about me to evade the incoming attack. The ground exploded from the sheer force of its fist impacting the earth, my eyes widening from the display of power from the being. I couldn't help but wonder if my 15,000 HP would be able to survive such a force, even with the numerous damage reduction skills in my repertoire. As my Sharingan spotted the giant preparing for another attack, Kanshou and Bakuya materialized in my hands, being retrieved from my inventory space. I channeled Wind Nature Chakra into the twin blades once more, activating Wind Blade Flow. This time, however, the sharpened layer of chakra extended up to a few meters long. I figured that I would need swords of such length to carve through the enormity of this abomination before me. I dashed forward with the help of Flash Step, and using the elongated Wind blade flow, I swung my twin swords through the freakish amalgamation of undead bodies. Contrary to my expectations, however, the Legion zombie was actually fast enough to largely evade my attacks. It disassembled itself right before the buzzing edge of my wind blade could actually cut through its torso and moved away. But I still managed to cut off one of its arms, though it was not as lethal as I had hoped. The Legion zombie flowed around me, surrounding myself like water crashing and folding itself against a breakwater. From my blind spot, a massive fist forms and crashed into my back. The immense physical might of the Legion zombie sent me careening through the air before my momentum was violently stopped by crashing into a tree. Minus 4,450 HP. White spots flooded my vision, and I felt myself slip into unconsciousness for a brief moment before I caught myself and leaped away from my landing zone, right as another massive fist smashed into where I had fallen a moment before. As expected, the damage incurred from a single attack was massive. Had the fist crushed me into the ground, instead of flying through the air and into a tree, I might not have gotten off so lightly. I had definitely and severely underestimated the hidden boss, taking it as just a giant walking target. Its colossal might paired with its swift and fluid movement made me feel like I was fighting against an ocean instead of an actual being. In fact, its fighting style reminded me of Gaara, with his free-flowing control of sand that featured similar liquid-like motions that could also solidify instantly and land a heavy blow at a moment's notice. I guess this might be good practice for if I ever fought Suna's Jinchuriki. Through my observe, I could see that I managed to deal massive damage to the Legion zombie. One of its arms were delimbed, but just like before, the zombies that formed the limbs stood up and climbed back up on the hidden boss, recovering its lost HP instantly as a new arm was created by extending and shaping dozens of zombies. Facing this seemingly immortal foe, I activated Quicken Thoughts, the int perk I received when the very same stat reached 100 and started formulating a plan. I deactivated my Wind Blade Flow, and inserted Kanshou and Bakuya back into my inventory. Deadly as it was, it did little to nothing to the Legion zombie when the zombies removed from its titanic body could simply stand up and climb back up to recover its lost HP. Large-scale and explosive jutsu would be most effective taking down this fiendish monster, I postulated. But at the same time I was cautious that I would simply be wasting CP if more and more zombies appeared and simply took the place of their fallen comrades. A dozen plans came and went through my head before my eyes lit up and erased the look of worry from my countenance. My pursed lips slowly morphed into a wild grin. Why worry about zombies appearing and healing the Legion zombie when he could just slaughter every single zombie that entered the cemetery instead? I had not planned on using this skill so soon, what with the Chunnin exams coming up and since the skill had a 1-week cooldown, but fuck it. Summon Doppelganger. Wisps of black smoke appeared next to me and condensed into an identical mirror image of myself. There was already a shared understanding of what needed to be done without an exchange of words between us. The doppelganger dashed towards the entrance of the cemetery where new zombies would appear from as it retrieved Kanshou and Bakuya from its inventory, settling into a stance and guarding against the gate like a guardian spirit. It had also retrieved Mask of Madness, an item that could increase its attack speed by 40% in exchange for a penalty to its stats once the duration was over. With the doppelganger ready to slaughter any zombie that tried entering the cemetery to heal the Legion zombie, I could focus all my attention on demolishing the massive monster without needing to worry about wasting my CP. Though half my max CP was needed to summon the doppelganger, I still had enough to systematically blast apart the Legion zombie. I activated the arcane ring I wore on my finger, which was able to store CP that could be later reclaimed, and 2000 CP was instantly recovered. I then formed several hand seals and proceeded to repeat my previous onslaught of explosive combination of wind and fire jutsu. As the blazing inferno burnt away the outer layer of zombies that made up the Legion zombies' skin, more zombies appeared at the cemetery gate, rushing forward to replenish the hidden boss's HP. However, my doppelganger that was now guarding the gate would not let even a single one step past him. Kanshou and Bakuya shone a luminescent light blue, indicating chakra flow being activated as my doppelganger started slicing apart any zombie that approached. Unlike the level 30 undead Uchiha Genin that I had previously fought, this new bunch of zombies individually only had single-digit levels, so the doppelganger very easily intercepted and beheaded them. Their numbers were overwhelming, but that too worked against them. The result of Kanshou's item effect. Anguish of Kanshou increased attack speed by 1% for every attack made, up to an enhancement of 100%. With so many zombies trying to rush into the graveyard, the doppelganger very quickly reached the cap of attack speed enhancement. By the time he slayed his 100th zombie, my doppelganger looked more like a whirlwind of blades, a tempest of metal that cut down any that dared approach. In fact, it was moving its arms so rapidly that the doppelganger's HP even started slowly dropping because of the backlash from the extreme speed and strength its body was unleashing, putting an absurd amount of strain on its body. The backlash was further exacerbated by the activation of Mask of Madness. The doppelganger was a good guinea pig for me to observe the side effects of skills and items without using them myself, since it could use them as well as I could. A stray thought popped into my head as I saw it using Mask of Madness, the glass eye of the prophet. If the doppelganger could equip it by implanting it in his eye, would I not be able to gain the ability of clairvoyance, without having to undergo the procedure myself? I filed that idea away as I refocused back onto the Legion zombie who, without the constant regeneration afforded by the mass of zombies, truly was just a giant walking target, even with its swift, fluid movement and tremendous strength. A few minutes and a few B-ranked Kaiten and Futon ninjutsu later, the Legion zombie was reduced to a writhing pile of zombies struggling to reform with just a tenth of its original number. Its HP also accurately reflected the paltry sum as compared to its previous total. However, with the Legion zombies' HP reduced to such an extent, the encroaching flood of zombies trying to take the place of their fallen comrade on the hidden boss increased proportionate to its HP lost. Now, there was a veritable flood of undead that was barely being held back by my doppelganger that was unleashing every trick in his book to resist the zombie tide. Seeing that I had no time to waste, I rushed forward and executed each and every last one of the remaining zombies with swift strokes of my Shinkyoken, enhanced knife hands. Their putrid viscera stained my hands and clothes with every cranium that were torn apart by my fingers. With the final one killed, the hundreds of undead bodies around and on me dissipated into black smoke as the system announced the dungeon cleared. Plus 27,349 EXP. Congratulations, you have eliminated the hidden boss. Plus 10 points. Plus 40,000 EXP. You may select a reward from the list below. Perk, Sharingan Master. Skill, Fire Fist. Item, Badge of Glorious Victory. You have leveled up. My CP was already dangerously low after that prolonged and tedious battle, so I deactivated all of the buffs I currently had on me, such as Sharingan and Chakra Enhancement. Then I took a look at the options presented to me and carefully considered my choices. I scoffed at the second option, first and foremost. Though I couldn't know for sure what the skill entailed, but if it was something like infusing fire nature chakra into my taijutsu, then it was a skill I could create myself with some time. Furthermore, if it was indeed another taijutsu skill, I already had Shinkyoken, a martial art that was both deadly and practical, and a skill that I already leveled up to quite a high level. Having to get familiar with a whole new taijutsu style starting from level 1 would be too much trouble. The best part about system-imparted skills were that some of them were impossible to replicate purely with chakra. Power Strike, for example, was truth be told an illogical skill. At max level, it could increase physical damage dealt by 200%. That was a percentage increase rather than just a base enhancement. Yet, regardless of how much additional damage it provided, it would always only ever consume 50 CP. Such a thing only made sense with the gamer system. As such, skills that I could create with my own experimentation with chakra were only secondary. It was the skills offered by the system that broke logic that were truly valuable. Similarly, the perk, Sharingan Master, was something I felt like I could eventually develop on my own or receive it as a quest reward somewhere down the line. Furthermore, it would not be as useful as it sounded, since I already decided to seal away usage of my Sharingan outside of the dungeon. There were too many eyes on the event, and with the threat of the snake and his spies lurking around at every corner, discovery of my Sharingan by Orochimaru posed an overwhelming threat to my continued freedom and welfare. Thus, I was resolute in not even activating it at any point in time during the Chunnin exams. The reason I entered the dungeon now of all times was for an immediate power-up in response to the upcoming exams and unforeseen dangers. As a result, a perk that increased the effectiveness of my Sharingan, which I had already decided not to use, would be useless. With the exclusion of the first two options, the only viable choice that remained was the third one, which I selected. Hopefully it would not be an unusable garbage item, I hoped. Badge of Glorious Victory Grade, Unique. Once a symbol of a renowned hero's illustrious contribution to a long-lost empire buried in the depths of history, now merely a decorative trinket. Durability, 7/10. Char plus 20. Item skill, Sublime Conquest. Increases all EXP gain by 10%. I blinked. Ha! A 10% increase to all EXP gained might not sound like a lot, but in the long run, that slight boost would sure to be insanely useful. Next, I approached and held the glowing purple loot orb that had appeared in place of the defeated Legion zombie. Loot gained happy smiley. Ancient Weapon Fragment, 3/6, Unique. Intermediate Chakra Potion X50, Rare. Legion Zombie Heart, Unique. The Intermediate Chakra Potion was one I had already received before, from the mob Uchiha undead genin that I had slaughtered before arriving at the boss fight. But a whole 50 of them were definitely precious loot. I could only store the Ancient Weapon Fragment with a shrug. Right now, it was completely useless. Its use would only appear once I have gotten my hands on all 6 of the fragments. The last item, on the other hand, was something I had never seen before. Legion Zombie Heart Grade, Unique. The crystallization of the Legion Zombie's essence. When consumed, permanent plus 25 to VIT. There is a small chance of developing additional effects when the heart is consumed. I took out the Legion Zombie Heart, a grey mass of flesh and muscle that vaguely resembled a human heart. Putrid fluid seeped out of the various valves, aortas and arteries protruding out of the organ. I'm supposed to eat this? I questioned out loud with palpable disgust in my voice as my face scrunched up in revulsion. I inspected the item in my hand, only barely tolerating the slimy texture of it on the skin on my palm. No fucking way. Nope. Nah. It's way too fucking disgusting. Just holding it was nauseating to a degree, I couldn't imagine taking a bite out of the damn thing. The logical part of me argued that it was a free 25 VIT stat points, so what was the cost of a brief moment of disgust? The saner side of me argued back that the cost was my dignity, self-respect and basic human decency. The two sides went back and forth for a while before I made the decision to store it back in my inventory. I wasn't going to throw it away, but I really couldn't bring myself to eat an actual zombie organ just for some stat points. There was even a small chance of developing additional effects, and I did not want to find out what those additional effects were. With the boss and hidden boss defeated, I was now free to leave the dungeon. However, with an hour left in the dungeon, there was one other thing I had to do. I called over my doppelganger, which coincidentally could last for an hour before vanishing. The fight took approximately 10 minutes. So I still had some time before the skill duration was over. I retrieved the glass eye of the prophet from my inventory and looked at my doppelganger in sympathy. You know what needs to be done. The doppelganger was unfeeling, possessing no human emotion nor desires with the sole exception of following my commands. He already knew what my intentions were, since he was basically me without the individuality. Without hesitation, the doppelganger reached up and tore out its left eye with Shinkyoken, enhanced fingers, the eye socket now devoid of its sight-giving organ and bleeding profusely. Unlike a shadow clone which would poof out of existence once a certain amount of damage was done to it, the doppelganger shared no such weakness. It was able to take damage equal to my HP without disappearing as long as his HP remained above 0. I gulped at the unfaltering ruthlessness of the doppelganger. I was sure that the memory of tearing out my own eyeball would hit me once it deactivated, and that was something I was not looking forward to experiencing. With no time to waste, I popped the glass eye of the prophet into the doppelganger's empty eye socket before administering medical ninjutsu to stanch the bleeding. The glass eye had a distinctively different appearance from my own eyes. While mine had black iris and pupils, the glass eye's iris was silver, almost mirror-like in its reflective quality. I could see my own reflection in the glass eye's silvery iris. Do you have it? The item skill, clairvoyance? I asked. Yes. It responded curtly. My expression brightened. This opened up so many possibilities. Use it. What do you see? Tell me everything. Team 10 stepped through the gates of the Shinobi Academy, where the first stage of the Chunnin exams would be held. Shinji smiled as he spied the various other genin who were flocking the main entrance of the building, similarly making their way to where they were headed as well. Most of them were from Konoha, and those from other villages stuck to their comrades. There was a tension in the air, formed from a ubiquity of caution and aspiration emanating from each and every individual. The foreign shinobi were especially on edge, considering the fact that they were in an unfamiliar place surrounded by unfamiliar shinobi. On the other end of the spectrum, Shinji could hardly contain his excitement. Though there was definitely a hint of unease as well, primarily due to the words his doppelganger had said to him when it used clairvoyance, and when he saw it for himself when the doppelganger was dismissed. Clairvoyance, active, LVL, max. CP cost, 1000. When activated, allows the user to see brief glimpses of a possible future. Clarity and duration of vision can be increased using the user's lifespan. Prolonged usage of skill also decreases the user's lifespan. What he had seen in the visions were, needless to say, disturbing, and they were not something he could easily change even if he wanted to. Sighing, Shinji continued onwards to the Shinobi Academy, ignoring the look of concern coming from Hinata. Because there was no way she could understand the reasons behind his anxiety, nor would he risk telling her about it. Team 10 entered the Shinobi Academy and climbed the staircase to the classroom where they needed to get to, only to find a throng of genin crowding the corridor. Oh right, Shinji recalled. This was the point where Izumo and Kotetsu would be blocking off the doorway to a second-floor classroom while disguising it as a third-floor classroom for the purpose of weeding out the unworthy. How that shallow level of deception managed to trick so many genin was beyond Shinji. The only guess he could make was that there were definitely many others who, like Team Guy, who decided to hide their own strength by acting foolish. That wasn't a particularly bad idea, but Shinji had too much pride to debase himself so. And he was sure that Shino and Hinata was similar as well, even if they didn't particularly portray themselves as being at all prideful. Scions of large Shinobi clans like them all held a certain level of pride and dignity even if they claimed the opposite. And it was especially so for the heirs and heiresses he had graduated with. They couldn't help it. That self-image was one inculcated in them since they were young, being raised in a prestigious clan they were born into. Shinji spotted a few Konoha genin arguing with Izumo and Kotetsu about letting them through, while Team Guy were in the crowd of genin looking on. It seemed that they were still observing the situation and had yet to make the decision to hide themselves in order to not attract attention. Shinji-kun. Hinata spoke up while tugging his sleeve. Shinji turned to the Hyuga and nodded, yeah, I know. It's an illusion. Let's go around them. No need to make a fuss here. I agree. Shino succinctly agreed as the three of them turned around to find another path to their destination. Unbeknownst to them, however, a pair of round eyes with thick brows had found their figures as they were walking away. That's last year's Rookie of the Year, Rock Lee remarked, a look of decisiveness in his round eyes. Tenten noticed her teammate's gaze and heard his comments before rolling her eyes. What are you planning now, Lee? Lee stood silent for a moment, watching the departing Team 10 before turning to his teammate. You guys go on ahead. I have something I want to check out. Huh? What are you talking about? She questioned, an annoyed frown on her face. The bull-haired genin didn't respond, only silently following after Team 10. The look of confusion in Tenten's eyes heightened. What the Lee isn't usually like this. She commented to her remaining teammate, only to find that Neji was similarly gazing at the departing Team 10. Shinji Ikrai, and her. You go on ahead. I have something I want to check out. Without waiting for a response, he followed in Lee's footsteps. Seriously? You two are such, ugh. I don't care anymore. She exclaimed before helpless following the Hyuga as well. Honestly, you two are more alike than you care to admit. She grumbled under her breath. As we made our way through the academy, we passed by the open area on the first floor, where I remembered Rock Lee challenging Sasuke before the Chunnin exams began proper. I felt a weird feeling of nostalgia over an event that I had only ever watched through a screen yet was now standing at. I wondered how the different Sasuke would fare against Lee. The Uchiha was a completely different person compared to how he was in canon. More patient and composed. His skills and technique were also a few notches above what he was supposed to be at right now, thanks to all the training I had done with him. Not only was his taijutsu better, his mastery over his Sharingan and control over his chakra was also already at Chunnin level. Add to that his proficiency in Kenjutsu, honed fight IQ and sharpened instincts, it was uncertain who the victor between the two, even if Lee released his chakra gates, might be. As I was flooded with nostalgia, I heard a voice cry out from above. Excuse me, hold on a moment please. I turned around and was shocked to see Rock Lee standing at the veranda of the floor above us, staring down at us, or specifically me, with a challenging look in his eyes. What was this situation? Yes. I forced out, past my initial shock. Was he here to ask me for Sajuke's location? I would like to ask you for a fight right now. He challenged before leaping down from the veranda and landing with the expected grace and technique of a taijutsu specialist. Me? I replied dumbly, as I looked around to see if he had actually directed the question to Sajuke, who was hiding somewhere around here. Yes. My name is Rock Lee. Lee started, gesturing to himself before pointing towards me, and I challenge you, Shinji Ikari, to a fight. Wait, why? I asked, still trying to figure out what was going on. Lee smiled. To be honest, I have heard a lot about you. Someone of civilian origin who was able to surpass all the clan shinobis in his generation and graduate as Rookie of the Year. And I'll admit, when I first heard of it, I felt angry. Angry at myself for not being able to do what you have done. You see, the strongest genin of Konoha is actually on my team. Hyuga Neji, a genius of the Hyuga clan, and someone I have never been able to surpass. Well, not yet at least. So I have to confess. The reason why I am challenging you is to verify my ability. Against someone who have already done what I aspire to, surpassing the geniuses from the mighty clans of this village. Which is why, please accept my request, Shinji Ikari. Allow me to test myself against you. Quest alert. Genius of hard work. Spar with Rock Lee. Defeat Rock Lee in a spar. Bonus, knock out Rock Lee. Bonus, force him to remove his weights. Bonus, force him to release his chakra gates. Rewards Happy Smiley. Plus 5000 EXP. Bonus 1, plus 5000 EXP. Bonus 2, new perk. Bonus 3, new skill. Failure Happy Smiley. Rep lowered with Rookie 9. Perk, monstrous talent, removed. New perk. Other brilliance in his eyes, one of unfiltered admiration. I can't stand it. I'm a cheater, Lee, a cheater. I am undeserving of your praise and admiration. But now I understood why he was challenging me to a fight instead of Sajuke. In Lee's eyes, a genius who have already been surpassed was one no longer deserving of his attention, probably. What he wanted to defeat was the genius that had never been defeated, his own teammate Neji. And to do so, he first wants to test himself against me, someone who was able to overcome his civilian background and defeat Sajuke, or so he thinks. At the same time, however, I wasn't one who shied away from a challenge, especially one that was declared so openly and directly. It wasn't like I could say no either. Well, I could, and it was definitely tempting to reject his challenge. The failure consequences of the quest were heavy to say the least. My monstrous talent perk gave him 7 free points instead of 5 every time he leveled up, a definitively beneficial factor that increased my strength. Even though it would be replaced with another perk, according to the failure consequences listed in the quest alert window, it would most definitely be of a lower standard, perhaps something that awarded 6 free points instead of 7. Then again, try as I might, I couldn't foresee me losing. Even if Lee unleashed all 4 of the 8 gates he had access to, and even if I couldn't use the Sharingan to boost my visual acuity. And besides, his biggest threat to me was his ability to open the first 4 of the 8 gates, which massively increased the flow of chakra in his body and consequently massively increasing his speed and strength. However, even if the quest had a bonus objective of forcing Lee to open his gates, I fully doubted that he would ever use it in a friendly spar against a fellow genin outside of the exams. Thus, I could only conclude that my chances were winning was over 90% if I didn't use the Sharingan, and over 80% if I held back the truly lethal skills in my repertoire. Of course, with the Sharingan, it would be 99% chance of victory. With these odds, how could I say no? I accept, I declared, pushing aside Hinata's look of concern and stepping forward towards Lee. Show me what you got, Lee. I accept, Shinji declared, stepping towards the opposing genin. Shinji, it is ill-advised to waste your energy before the exam. It would be illogical to do so for something so pointless. Shino spoke up. The Abiram taking the initiative to give his opinion in something that didn't directly affect him was a rare sight, and when he did do it, it meant he was serious. Though he was rarely serious anyways. Hinata turned to her teammate with a knowing smile. Don't worry, Shinji-kun won't take long. That boy's chakra reserves are as small as an academy student's. Her Byakugan had already been activated the moment Lee appeared, instinctively activating them to assess a possible threat to their team, or more specifically a possible threat to Shinji. But she immediately relaxed upon seeing how tiny his reserves were. An experienced Hyuga, or any experienced shinobi really, would have known not to judge a book by its cover. 9 times out of 10, the size of one's chakra reserves were a pretty accurate measurement of their strength and ability. After all, nearly every form of the shinobi arts required chakra in one way or another. It was also why Neji never took Lee seriously. Every time the Hyuga prodigy activated his Daojutsu, he was reminded of Lee's meager chakra reserves and lacking proficiency in manipulating it. As a result, no matter how much effort Lee had put into his training, Neji never once saw him as anything other than a failure who could never defeat a genius. That 1 time out of 10, however, was usually what got the inexperienced and the conceited killed in their moment of carelessness. And unbeknownst to almost everybody else in the world, Lee embodied that 10% like no other. Lee heard her comments but chose not to respond in any way, steadfastly watching Shinji's every movement. Shinji himself could only chuckle inwardly, mocking how wrong she really was, but similar to Lee, he did not comment on her theory. He did, however, observe, on Lee to check out who he was going to face. Rock Lee LV41. HP 28170/28170. CP 3350/3350. Lee is a genin of Konohigakure and a member of Team Guy. He is unfortunately born with a unique constitution, resulting in a deficient chakra system. As a result, he is unable to manipulate chakra outside his body and only able to control chakra within his body or on the surface of it, but to a substandard degree. However, owing to his strong will and relentless dedication to training, he has overcome this deficiency and established himself as a prominent taijutsu specialist. He admires you and thinks of you as his rival. Lee is as strong as you. It was immediately apparent from his status that Lee's stats leaned overwhelmingly towards the physical, possessing a high HP in exchange for low CP. He even had higher HP than Shinji, who was of a higher level than him and who generally had higher stats than those with similar levels. Furthermore, Shinji knew Lee wasn't just tanky with high HP and nothing else, his strength and speed was on another level as well. And just as Shinji was analyzing his opponent, so too was Lee examining the other person. I am lucky to be able to contend with the #1 rookie who has defied all expectations and surpassed the publicly recognized genius, Uchiha Sasuke. I am certain I will learn much from this experience. Lee thought to himself with a slight smile. His smile was not born from condescension nor conceit. Rather, it was one of respect and gratitude for his opponent. Wait a minute, Lee. Are you actually going to fight right before the exams? At this time, a feminine voice called out from the sidelines. Lee turned to see his teammate, Tenten, standing some distance away from Shinji's teammate. For a moment he looked guilty, looking like a child who was caught with his hand in the cookie jar, but his determination replaced any hesitance that had appeared. Please forgive my selfishness, Tenten. But this is something I have to do, Lee declared, before turning his eyes back onto his opponent. Tenten gritted her teeth, her eyebrows twitching. Seriously, what is wrong with this team? Why do I always have to be the rational one? However, seeing that Lee was no longer even paying attention, she huffed and folded her arms. TSK, you're not even listening to me anymore. Fine, just quickly win and don't drag things out. We don't want to be late to the exam after all. Hinata eyed the newly arrived girl with palpable rage, but the look of intense fury was just as quickly replaced with a slight smile. Don't worry, I'm sure Shinji-kun will make it quick. It won't take long for him to win. She gently spoke, although there was a discernible edge to her tone. Tenten frowned and turned to the other girl, who in her eyes was just a mindless fangirl ignorant of the realities of the world, a Hyuuga. TCH. Listen kid, you guys may have been big shots in the academy or whatever, but we're your senpai. We graduated a year before you kids, which also means we have had a full year more experience and focused tutoring than you. Honestly, I don't even know what your Chunnin sensei was thinking entering you into the Chunnin exams. There's no way you kids are at all ready for the big leagues. The gentle smile faded. Hinata now spotted a cold look of silent dissatisfaction. She honestly didn't care about what anyone said to her, even if they insulted her to her face. But there were two things she could not tolerate: someone speaking ill of her clan, and of Shinji. Hinata was raised as the heiress of the elite Hyuuga clan, and as such a certain degree of pride was ingrained in her from her heritage. More so than even the other heirs and heiresses of the other shinobi clans. The Hyuuga were a prideful bunch. In fact, they were proud of the fact that they could be so proud. Because their clan was one that had the privilege to do so after so many years of contributing so much to the village. It was no exaggeration that the Hyuuga clan, with their vaunted Daojutsu and renowned gentle fist, was one of 3 clans that contributed the most to Konoha's current prominence. The other 2 being the Senju and the Uchiha, both of which now only had one remaining member still officially loyal to the village. Furthermore, the former of which could only barely be considered still part of Konoha, with the Senju princess roaming the world and not on active duty, while the latter only had a genin as the sole inheritor of their entire legendary legacy. Hence, of these 3 clans, only the Hyuuga still remained flourishing and prosperous. Which also meant that they were the de facto, by process of elimination, number 1 clan of Konoha. And that title also came with a certain level of prestige and/or that demanded respect. Hinata was not a person that thought so highly of herself on the sole basis of her heritage and position of privilege that she was disdainful of any non-clan shinobi. How could she be when the love of her life was one raised as an orphan, even if he did turn out to have Uchiha blood? But when she heard such disrespectful words directed so blatantly in front of her, it was that very position of privilege that demanded her to come to its defense. I don't like the way you spoke the name of my clan. Have some respect, you fool. She spoke, with the pride, dignity, and superiority that was expected of her in a manner that condescended someone who had just disrespected her clan. Tenten quirked an eyebrow. It seems you do have some claws of your own. Either way, I know your type. and trust me, I am more familiar with the Hyuga than I'd like to be. I have one as a teammate after all. The Hyuga who had kept her Byakugan active spotted someone else watching them from the veranda of the second story but scoffed when she recognized who that person was, someone who she would not give an ounce of her attention when Shinji was about to fight right in front of her. Neji, who similarly had his Byakugan activated, seethed in anger when he saw Hinata's dismissive attitude. He had arrived a few moments before Lee, and so he had been hiding and watching Lee's entire interaction with his cousin's team from a distance. Hinata rolled her pupilless eyes and turned away from Tenten, no longer tolerating any further waste of her time and attention. There were more important things to focus on, like Shinji's impending clash with the failure of a shinobi with pitiful chakra reserves. Shinji and Lee exchanged looks, neither saying another word, and both waited for the other to make the first move. Their eyes flickered between their opponent's eyes, arms, legs, shoulders, hips and toes, vigilant of any slight twitch of a muscle. The air was filled with a palpable tension like that of a taut bowstring pulled to its maximum limit, ready to snap at any moment. The silence in their makeshift arena might have fooled a layman observer to think they were just pointlessly checking each other out. The reality, however, was that Lee and Shinji had already exchanged a dozen blows in their heads. Both were simulating how their foe might respond to any action taken and how they might counter that response, and so on and so forth. Hinata, Shino and Tenten backed away, giving the two fighters space to conduct their duel. The teammates of the two parties had the utmost confidence in them. Hinata and Shino had seen for themselves how strong and talented Shinji was, and similarly, Tenten knew how much effort Lee put into his training. What's more, Tenten thought of that 1-year gap between them to be an immovable disadvantage for the younger genin. To them, their teammates' victory was already a foregone conclusion. Shinji moved first, a tactical consideration. The one who made the first move was always in the advantageous position. Just as it was in chess or shogi, so too did that apply in battle. He sped towards Lee, who decided to meet him in the middle as well. Shinji threw a high kick that was easily evaded by the bull-haired genin, who returned his own. Shinji sidestepped from the kick, simultaneously launching a hook directed at his opponent's jaw. His punch was parried as Lee threw a counter. This exchange went on for several seconds, with both sides throwing their own attacks while evading their adversaries. Their movements were smooth, looking almost choreographed. Most taijutsu battles between two individuals proficient in the martial arts who were also at a similar level often resembled like a rehearsed dance. A sequence of steps, an arrangement of moves and a composition of techniques that smoothly blended together until one could no longer distinguish between the two. Shino and Hinata, after having spent so many months with Shinji, were not at all surprised at their teammates' skill and technique. Although, what was out of their expectation was Lee being able to keep up with their prodigious teammate. Yet precisely because they were so familiar with Shinji's strength that they also understood Shinji had yet to become serious. Their teammate was only utilizing the Konoha Academy taijutsu style they were taught when they were still students, and not his deadly and insidious Shinkyoken. Additionally, his true speed and strength was nowhere near what he was currently revealing. It was even clearer to Hinata, whose eyes could see through the mysteries of ephemeral chakra. Shinji wasn't enhancing his muscles with chakra, and neither was his opponent. Both were only using their base speed and strength to contend with one another, merely feeling out their opponent through an exchange of technique. Of course, no observer would be clearer about the exact details of their exchange than the two who were personally in it. Shinji was moving as fast as, and his strikes as strong as what he was physically capable of without using, chakra enhancement. However, it was also abundantly clear to him that Li was still holding back. More than once he had blocked an oncoming blow only for his arm to shake in response to Li's strength and penetrative ability of his fists. Furthermore, the bull-haired Chunnin's stance was steady, never fluctuating, revealing supreme confidence in his own skills. This guy's physical stats are higher than mine, Shinji concluded, noticing that Li still looked as calm and collected as a motionless lake. He was parrying and evading Shinji's strikes effortless while slowly increasing the intensity of his own, as if asking through fists and kicks, "Is this all you have?" Furthermore, although Shinji had always been proud of his instincts and combat sense forged through the hundreds of undead lives he had reaped in the Uchiha natural dungeons and life or death battles against the bosses and hidden bosses of said dungeons, he had to admit that Li's talent for physical violence was very simply superior to his. This guy's physical stats are higher than mine, Shinji concluded, noticing that Li still looked as calm and collected as a motionless lake. He was parrying and evading Shinji's strikes effortless while slowly increasing the intensity of his own, as if asking through fists and kicks, "Is this all you have?" Furthermore, although Shinji had always been proud of his instincts and combat sense forged through the hundreds of undead lives he had reaped in the Uchiha natural dungeons and life or death battles against the bosses and hidden bosses of said dungeons, he had to admit that Li's talent for physical violence was very simply superior to his. Who has the audacity to claim Li was a failure? Such combat instincts are not something that can be trained. And unless Team Guy regularly undergoes life-threatening missions where they put their lives on the line that I did not know of, this is pure talent, Shinji grimly concluded in his head. And as this thought was formed, a fist snuck through Shinji's guard and landed on his cheek, pushing him back several feet. Shinji rubbed against the spot where Li's fist impacted. It was only a graze since he was able to barely turn his head the moment he saw it coming, dealing little to no damage that was already being recovered from his natural regeneration. But it was a solemn representation that Li was one notch better than him in terms of physical combat. Li frowned as he settled back into his trademarked Goken stance, his round eyes narrowing slightly as if questioning whether Shinji really had the privilege to be so absent-minded during their fight when he was only barely able to keep up. It was a faint look of disappointment and provocation. Shinji grinned. It seemed like Academy Taijutsu was no longer going to cut it. "Sorry. I will take this seriously from now on," he offered without any prompting from Li. A sign of respect and self-deprecation that was rare coming from him. Blood would certainly be shed now that Shinji decided to make full use of this dangerous instrument of violence. Shinji justified that he could just heal up any injuries Li were to suffer. After all, the consequences to losing this battle was far too punishing to take lightly. Li nodded, "Thank you. Otherwise, this would have been a disappointing match." Hinata saw chakra shuffling into the green spandex wearing Chunnin's muscles, sluggishly and lethargically, a symptom of Li's deficient chakra system. However, his manipulation of chakra was peculiar in a manner she had not been expecting. It's slow, clunky and lacking in both quantity and quality. Yet, why does it feel so refined? Like a diamond in the rough, very slowly but surely being polished into brilliance, she noted while observing with her Byakugan. Shinji-kun's, on the other hand, is like a raging inferno that is simultaneously controlled like a hurricane rotating in place. However, as much as I hate to admit it, that boy's mastery with chakra enhancement is undeniably more outstanding than Shinji. There was not a single iota of chakra being wasted, not a testament to Li's talent in controlling his chakra, but rather, It was evidence of hundreds and hundreds of hours invested into the very act of layering his disadvantaged body with chakra. An act the genin have become so intimately familiar with, it had become almost second nature, as though stemming from the same part of his nervous system that controlled breathing while asleep. It was the only method for Lee to overcome his deficient chakra system, and his only weapon to surpass Shinobi, who did not suffer from what many others would consider a crippling disability. An ability he had to master to keep up with everyone else around him who achieved the same results with a third the effort. "What do you see with those eyes of yours?" Tenten remarked to Hinata, eyeing the fight with a satisfied smile on her face. "His chakra system must look like a mess to you, doesn't it?" Hinata glanced at the fellow kunoichi but remained silent. She was not willing to give her any modicum of satisfaction. Seeing her Kuhai's quiet attempt at defiance, Tenten smirked. "Your Bakugan can see many things, but you can't see a person's history. You may be able to see Lee's small chakra reserves and inefficient chakra control, but you know not of the hours he put into his training. But I have seen it with my own boring and inferior eyes, the blood, sweat and tears he has shed pounding away at a training dummy unceasingly. Day after day, weeks after weeks and months after months. There is no way greenhouse flowers like yourselves can match Lee." Hinata bit back the retort stuck in her throat. There was an element of truth to what the kunoichi said, but her words were also chock full of hypocrisy. Even if she didn't know how hard the bull-haired genin trained, Hinata knew how hard Shinji trained despite his prodigal talent. So for her to condescend him as though he had never once worked hard a day in his life was simply conceited. Though she felt indignant on Shinji's behalf, Hinata also didn't think it necessary to debate the other girl. Results were all that was needed to disprove her half-baked theories and mistaken assumptions. Shinji will defeat the other genin, that she had no doubt of. Shino similarly said nothing in response, as was standard for the Aburam. He was clearer than anyone else the rate of Shinji's improvement. It had only been a mere 6 months since they graduated, but already, Shinji had grown leaps and bounds ahead of their entire graduating class. Asuma had remarked on more than one occasion his praise for Shinji's talent. After all, in his own taciturn manner, Shino had competed with his prodigious teammate only to see the gap between them widen further and further. Shinji's speed and strength grew constantly, to an almost unnatural extent. Shino had tried investigating his teammate's body once or twice before using his Kikaichu. It was just a surface analysis over the secret behind Shinji's abnormal growth rate, nothing too intrusive. His findings were inconclusive. Shinji bled like any other person. There was nothing special in the food he consumed nor in the excrements he discharged. By all appearances, there was nothing unique that stood out about Shinji. Yet, there was also something definitely odd about his physique that made no sense to the Aburam. However, with his clan's methods, there was no way for him to investigate further. As such, he could only deem his investigations as inconclusive. Which also meant that Shino had yet to give up competing with Shinji. Because inconclusive findings also meant that the future was not set in stone. Shinji's rate of improvement might possibly slow down in the future, and Shino could eventually catch up. Or at least, that was the only way the Aburam could justify it in a completely rational and logical manner. Shinji's fingers straightened and flexed, the veins under the skin of his digits bulging as chakra was channeled into his hands. Shinkyokan was deadly and insidious. A bloodthirsty martial art of which its sole purpose was seeking the lives of the practitioner's enemies, in contrast to the blunt and straightforward but honest Goken Lee practiced. Do not treat this as disrespect, but I must warn you, my martial art is designed to cut and pierce, not an instrument fashioned for friendly spars. Thus, it will be inevitable for blood to be shed. Although I am proficient in medical ninjutsu and as such will be able to heal injuries that are not too severe, I will still insist on having the decency of giving forewarning. Do you understand? Shinji warned. Lee glanced at Shinji's hands, which now emanated an aura that was completely different from the Konoha Academy Taijutsu stance he had used a moment before. Although the bull-haired genin could not compare to his master's command over Taijutsu, he could still unabashedly boast that he was the premier Taijutsu expert amongst their generation. Yet, he had never once seen such a strange martial art. One that oozed sickly killing intent just from its activation. Clearly Shinji was being serious with his comment. The Taijutsu specialist smiled brightly. How convenient, medical ninjutsu must be wonderful for training purposes. After the exam is over, we must train together, Shinji-kun. Shinji couldn't help but chuckle when he heard Lee's enthusiastic response. Not only did his warning go unheeded, but Lee's reply was also one of utmost confidence, as if politely implying that such a warning was simply unnecessary. Instead, he paid more attention to the fact that Shinji could use medical ninjutsu, and even emphasized that it would be incredibly useful for training. Not only did such a statement firmly but politely shoot down Shinji's condescending concern for his opponent, it highlighted Lee's incredible dedication, nay, his obsession with training. What a pity, Shinji remarked inwardly, that he had to defeat this admirable individual who despite his deficiencies still achieved this level of strength, a level of strength that would have been considered number one amongst Konoha's genin had it not been for Shinji's transmigration and subsequent intervention. As such, he could only laugh and agree, yes, I look forward to training with you after the exams are over. Lee nodded in appreciation at the reciprocated gesture. His fists tightened and his feet shifted into the primary stance of the Goken. For a moment, they were quiet. Under a shared silence of mutual respect and recognition. Before that very silence was broken as the two of them launched themselves at each other. Their observers watched as the two genin sped towards each other, their speed several times what they had been before. Although Shinji was noticeably faster, a result of him activating whirlwind steps. The current Shinji, with all of his buffs and perks that either passively or actively increased his speed, was of a higher league when compared to Lee, who was still weighed down by the heavy chunks of metal strapped to his ankle. Lee rotated his body as they neared, a telltale initiation of his signature move. Konoha Senpua, he announced, as an orange blur flew towards Shinji's face, a backwards high kick using his left foot. Now that his body and kick was being empowered by chakra, it was multitudes stronger and faster than before. Not to mention those very same weights that held him back also contributed to the devastating power his kick would hold, crashing into his opponent. That was only if it landed, of course. Shinji had also similarly enhanced his speed and strength with chakra, and the difference between the two was that Shinji was not limited by a low chakra capacity like his opponent. His chakra reserves were not only larger, but it was also of a higher quality. Despite the fact that Lee's mastery over chakra enhancement had already surpassed many Chunnin, Shinji could similarly achieve the same results via the brute force of his high int and various perks that amplified the potency of his chakra. If Lee was using 100 CP to enhance himself every minute, Shinji only needed 50 CP to achieve the same results. Its amplifying effect would even be further enhanced if he injected more chakra than was necessary to match Lee. Shinji swung his arm to intercept Lee's kick with a blade palm, and had it connected, might have sliced into Lee's shin bone. However, Konoha Senpua was an ingenious set of moves within the Goken martial art. It was designed with theoretically countless variations, meant to counter an enemy's counter through sheer speed and flexibility of its practitioner. Although Lee's position looked awkward with 1 foot high in the air directed towards his opponent's face, his hands and other foot could still maneuver to catch Shinji from another angle. As such, Lee was able to effortlessly twist himself in midair with the help of his hands acting as a fulcrum to rotate his lower body like a break dancer and allow his other leg to fly in from another direction. Lee could recognize the danger Shinji's deadly-looking fingers posed, so though he was curious about the details of his opponent's martial art, he was not willing to test it out. At this point, he was fully treating Shinji's hands as though they were holding knives and approaching him with the same caution as one would an armed attacker. Thus, Lee's right foot was able to carve right through Shinji, without him even being able to feel any resistance. Shinji's figure faded away as a slight breeze blew past Lee. An afterimage. Lee realized, before his foot even made contact. In truth, he had already noticed Shinji rapidly moving away after launching his second kick. But his body was too slow to react properly, a consequence of the weights holding down his feet that at his moment felt more like an anchor. The moment Shinji sensed Lee's other foot coming at him from a direction he could not properly block, he decisively used flash step, fueled by wind nature chakra to disappear from Lee's sight to reappear behind the bull-haired genin who was helpless to stop his next move. An afterimage. Lee realized, before his foot even made contact. In truth, he had already noticed Shinji rapidly moving away after launching his second kick. But his body was too slow to react properly, a consequence of the weights holding down his feet that at his moment felt more like an anchor. The moment Shinji sensed Lee's other foot coming at him from a direction he could not properly block, he decisively used flash step, fueled by wind nature chakra to disappear from Lee's sight to reappear behind the bull-haired genin who was helpless to stop his next move. Unlike Lee, from the audience's perspective, all they could see was Lee kicking through Shinji, only to realize that it was only an afterimage, and the Rookie of the Year was already behind the spandex-wearing genin. Lee! A feminine voice yelled out, cutting through the silence in shock, but that verbal warning could extend no aid towards the target of her concern. Shinji extended a finger enhanced by Shinkyoken, and poked his opponent's torso. The finger, unnaturally straight like that of an S-stick, pierced through Lee's defenseless back. Lee immediately reacted by furiously swinging back, a continuation of his initial Konoha Senpua, but Shinji had already retreated, evading the kick that was more of an emotional response than any sort of measured, rational retaliation to the surprisingly brutal attack. However, vicious though it may have been, Shinji's attack was neither ruthless nor sadistic. The point of impact was chosen specifically, a result of Shinji's Medicnin training, to deliver a non-lethal and superficial injury, even if it was a tad bit bloody. Sure, he could have thrusted his entire hand through the back of Lee's torso like a hot knife through butter and crushed his heart right at that very moment of vulnerability, but such an act would have been exceedingly senseless and pointedly idiotic. Shinji would have gained nothing from fatally wounding his opponent when they were only engaging in a friendly duel. The only reason why he was even willing to shed blood was the knowledge that he could close up the wound after the fight was over. Feeling his flesh being pierced, Lee leaped away from his opponent at the surprising turn of events, who graciously elected not to pursue. The genin reached back to nurse his injury and flinched when he felt piercing pain on his back, shocked to find the unmistakable crimson hue of blood staining his fingers when he brought his hand back to inspect it. A martial art that could cut and pierce with one's hands as easily as it would with a knife, What a terrifying taijutsu style, Lee grimly observed. So this is what you meant by a deadly martial art. My eyes have been opened. He sighed in admiration, but his sharp eyes found its way onto the hardwood floorboards. More specifically, the point at which Shinji had used his flash step had been shattered, leaving splinters and shards of wood in his wake. That speed, I saw him moving, but my body wasn't fast enough to react. How hard must he have trained to achieve such an agility? I have been too conceited to think that there was another who have similarly pushed himself to the extremes of human limitations. Though Lee's thoughts were self-deprecating, it contained admiration and delight. It was also very wrong. I warned you. Shinji replied and knowingly eyes Lee's ankle warmers. Though he may have won that exchange, Shinji was still very aware of just how fast and strong Lee could really be once he removed the weights around his ankles. However, that was also precisely his goal, since he had a bonus objective to complete. The flesh wound he gave Lee, as well as the knowing look, was a statement, one that said, I will only make you bleed more if you don't get serious. Lee's thick brows furrowed, but he also had on an expression of delight. As expected, he must have noticed that I was still holding back due to my training weights. I was worried that I would only be disappointed by the supposed Rookie of the Year, but instead of disappointment, all I can feel is excitement. I understand, Shinji-kun. Allow me to reciprocate your sincerity. Lee spoke with conviction, before sitting down. He then slipped off the orange ankle warmers to reveal a pair of ankle weights strapped to his leg. Amongst the audience, Hinata had on a mocking smirk. Weights? Futile. Does he think removing some measly little weights will be enough to deal with Shinji? Tenten returned that jeering with her own confident smile. It's a cliched training, but one that has been taken to the extreme by Lee. Don't underestimate him just because he can't use genjutsu and ninjutsu, because in terms of taijutsu, Lee is a monster. Instead of throwing it to the side, Lee gently placed down his weights on the floor of their arena, not revealing to the audience the full intensity of his extreme training routine. Yosh! Now I can finally move freely, he exclaimed as he stood back up while staring excitedly at his opponent. Shinji felt his muscles tighten, fully aware of how fast Lee was going to be now that he was getting serious. As a result, he knew that before Lee warmed up to his new speed, he had to strike first. Flash step. Shinji reappeared next to Lee, his hand already layered with chakra that was both penetrative and protective. I shouldn't hurt him too badly. So aiming at his vitals are out. Somewhere that can be easily healed. Okay, I will tear up his arm then. Shinji decided as his knife hand sped towards Lee's appendage. Until a kick crashed into his torso and sent Shinji flying backwards. Fast, was his only reaction before Lee reappeared behind Shinji and threw another kick towards his opponent. This time, Shinji was able to react properly by blocking it with his arm. The impact was several times stronger than before, showing just how much those weights had really been holding Lee back. But just an instant after the connection, Lee disappeared again and his fist slammed into Shinji's sides. Shinji flew away but was able to catch himself in midair and land on his feet. The damage wasn't significant, but it was also nothing to scoff at. He had layered protective chakra all over his body, so it was really only the momentum that had sent him flying rather than any sort of real damage. But what surprised Shinji the most was how fast Lee really was. He had the bitter realization that the only way for him to match that speed was with the activation of his Sharingan. Amazing! Shinji breathed out a heartfelt praise. Lee smiled in reciprocation, a feeling of pride blossoming within him. Hearing such a compliment from someone he was quickly starting to see as a rival was cathartic. This was vindication. It was proof that all the blood, sweat and tears he had put into his rigorous and painful training was worth something after all. "Thank you," Lee replied, a genuine appreciation for Shinji's one-word comment. As much as Shinji wanted to compete with him over their taijutsu, he also decisively came to the conclusion that unfortunately he just could not compete with his opponent solely with martial arts. Lee was someone who had dedicated the better part of his career to taijutsu because he couldn't use ninjutsu or genjutsu. Therefore, he channeled all of his time, all of his energy, his entire being into taijutsu. On the other hand, Shinji distributed his time equally to all three major facets of the shinobi arts. So in comparison, Shinji's own comprehension towards taijutsu could only be considered as trifling. However, that also meant Shinji had methods aside from taijutsu that could be used to deal with Lee. The other genin, upon seeing the initial success of his taijutsu, did not want to surrender this opportunity. And so Lee sped forward, his motions looking less visible than a blur to the other genin watching their fight. Impossible, he is even faster than Shinji-kun," Hinata exclaimed, hardly trusting her own all-seeing eyes. Yet, the truth was undeniable. Shino's eyes widened, though the sight of his astonishment was hidden behind his dark shades and high collar. He was one of the few people in the village who was truly familiar with how fast Shinji could be, having seen him go all out more than once or twice. As a result, seeing this unknown genin who he had previously thought little of surpass that speed was simply astonishing. Tenten quirked an eyebrow. Although what she wanted to do so dearly right now was to gloat and rub it in the faces of her cocky kuhai who was so cocky, she herself was rather surprised at how the fight was progressing. Firstly, she didn't think that Lee would have been pressured so heavily to the point where he would have to remove his weights just to gain an advantage. Secondly, Lee's opponent was actually fast enough to keep up with Lee when her teammate was only just a few steps away from going all out. Thus, she couldn't find it in herself to gloat when she was also caught by surprise. Lee arrived next to Shinji, a back fist rocketing towards his opponent, who parried with a knife hand while simultaneously delivering a razor-sharp kick towards Lee. A less proficient martial artist would have had their hand shredded by Shinji's parry using a Shinkyoken-enhanced knife hand, but Lee was skilled enough to block without having his own digits blooded. The bowl-haired genin moved underneath the kick, only to realize that the kick was only a ruse. Shinji used a one-footed, flash step, at that moment to reappear behind Lee, who was busy evading the attack. In that 1 second Lee took to realize Shinji had disappeared and reappeared behind him before turning around. Shinji's hands blurred, forming several hand seals in an instant. Genjutsu, Nai's no Kijidotosia. A surge of invisible and ephemeral chakra shot towards Lee like a spike, piercing through his cranium and entering his brain. The chakra worked through his neural pathways, layering a coat of chakra on certain parts of the brain to rewire what Lee would see and hear. The 1 second Lee took to realize Shinji had disappeared and turned around was a second too long, as within that moment of diversion, Shinji had already performed and executed his genjutsu without Lee even seeing or knowing about it. The bowl-haired genin turned and rushed towards Shinji, who was already prepared to face him. The two exchanged blows, chakra-enhanced fists met chakra-enhanced kicks, and together they formed a veritable whirlwind of taijutsu moves. The hardwood floor beneath them cracked under the sustained pressure of the two fighting upon them, while shockwaves occasionally exploded out from particularly powerful connections. Amazing, even after I took off my weights he can still match me blow for blow. Truly, he is the person who have managed to surpass geniuses despite being of civilian birth. Lee thought to himself in admiration, excited to be trading blows with Shinji, who he was quickly starting to view as a rival. On his peripheral view, he could see his teammate Tenten shouting something, but he couldn't decipher what she was saying. The sound was too muted, likely from the blood rushing to his ears from his excitement. But even if he couldn't hear what she was saying, he knew she was cheering him on. Or at least, that was what Lee believed. In truth, what Lee saw with his eyes were vastly different from what the rest saw with theirs. False shadow equivalency, it was a genjutsu technique Shinji found and learned from the Uchiha Jutsu repository. It created a phantom opponent, the duplicate of the user, in order to mislead the target while simultaneously hiding the actual user away from the target's sight. Genjutsu functioned by controlling the chakra flow of a target's cerebral nervous system, and in doing so influenced their 5 senses. False shadow equivalency targeted 3 of these 5 senses: sight, sound and touch. It was not only able to create a phantom doppelganger for Lee to clash with, but also replicate that sensation of flesh hitting flesh every time they exchanged blows. The entire time Lee thought he was fighting with Shinji, he was actually just fighting the air. Of course, any genjutsu master would have scoffed at such a substandard genjutsu. A true illusionary technique was able to replicate and deceive all 5 of the target's senses. The false shadow equivalency, being able to influence only 3 of those 5, would only be considered second-rate. This was not something Shinji could do anything about, however. The Uchiha Jutsu repository had a wide array of jutsu scrolls stored in them, and that was precisely the case for genjutsu. However, a vast majority of the genjutsu techniques located in the Uchiha Jutsu repository was ocular genjutsu. Meaning, these genjutsu required the Sharingan in order to activate and use them, which was a prerequisite Shinji obviously could not make use of. Not now. Lee, you are under a genjutsu. Snap out of it. Tenten yelled from the sidelines with little effect. The other auditory effect of false shadow equivalency was, aside from recreating the sounds of fighting an imagined enemy, masking noise in the background, to further minimize the chances of the target breaking out of the illusion. In truth, false shadow equivalency was not an overtly complicated genjutsu. For most Chunnin, and even some genin, it was not difficult to break out of. Lee as well, despite his chakra system deficiency, could have also broken out of the genjutsu had he known about it. That was because his defective chakra system could still allow him to control and mold chakra inside of his body. Most genjutsu only needed for one to disrupt the chakra flow within themselves in order to break free of the illusion. No, what stopped Lee from breaking out of the genjutsu was not his inability to do so. Rather, it was his inexperience. His genin team consisted of Neji, another taijutsu specialist, Tenten, a weapons specialist, and Guy, who was a jounin that leaned heavily towards taijutsu. He simply had too little experience dealing with and countering genjutsu. As a result, even if Lee was a monster in the martial arts and everything else physical in the shinobi arts, without sufficient experience dealing with crafty illusions and scheming genjutsu users, he was not able to perceive the genjutsu he was under and subsequently break himself out of it. Shinji stood a fair distance away from Lee, who looked as though he was shadow boxing, fighting an invisible enemy who wasn't really there and evading fists and kicks that did not exist. He sighed with discontent. This is the reality of the world. There is no perfect jutsu. Everything has its strengths and weaknesses. Although Lee is strong in taijutsu, when faced with other aspects of the shinobi arts, he is still lacking. and though I sincerely wanted to face him and contend purely with martial arts, I too am still lacking, at least when compared to him. Enough time had passed, and Shinji was no longer willing to let Lee continue making a fool of himself. It's time to end this, he decided. But at the same time, it was difficult. He wanted to fulfill as many bonus objectives as he could, from his quest to defeat Lee in a spa. One of which was to knock him out. The second bonus objective he had already completed, by forcing him to remove his weights, whereas the third he held little hopes for. It would be impossible to push Lee to such a corner where he was forced to open his chakra gates during a friendly spa. However, knocking Lee out would be difficult. Lee was someone who had trained his body extensively. Scratch that, he only trained his body. As such, he also had high HP and by extension a resilient physique. It wasn't like in the movies where he could just deliver a swift chop to the back of the neck that would instantly knock him unconscious. At least, not against someone like Lee who was currently enhancing himself with chakra that held both offensive and protective properties. Knocking someone like that unconscious would require a prolonged battle that would exhaust his energy and strength before he could deliver the finishing blow that would render him unconscious. That was something Shinji did not want to resort to, since the Chunnin exams were going to be starting soon. For Shinji, recovering HP and CP was not an issue, especially after his last power-up when he pumped in all his free stat points. It would take an hour or so for him to completely recover, and the first stage of the Chunnin exam would be longer than that. So he would already be fully recovered by the time the second stage of the exam started. His concern was actually for Lee, someone he thought truly deserved to progress in the Chunnin exams even if he would inevitably be defeated by Gaara in the preliminaries. But then, Shinji had an idea. Knocking someone out didn't always mean beating them into unconsciousness. He stealthily approached Lee, still throwing kicks into empty space, before quickly using Flash Step to get behind the other boy. He then activated Bull Strength, that increased his STR stat by 20% before lunging and wrapping his arm around Lee's neck. Shinji was using one arm to asphyxiate Lee while the other pinned down one of his arms. The other genin who had been busy attacking the illusionary enemy Shinji had created immediately reacted upon feeling an arm snake around his neck and another arm wrap under his armpit. "Who is interfering in our honorable duel?" was Lee's first thought, but at that moment, he understood. Lee had eccentric behaviors, and he also clearly favored the physical might of Taijutsu, but that did not mean he was stupid. He may have lacked experience in discerning illusion from reality, but he was smart enough to realize at that moment everything that had happened was only an illusion, as well as the fact that it wasn't a third party who was interfering in their fight but his opponent's real body. Lee leapt backwards with Shinji still attached to his back, bringing them both across the room in a single leap. Lee crashed into the wall, with Shinji taking the brunt of the impact but the younger genin only took minimal damage from it. In fact, his grip had tightened, constricting Lee's blood vessels and restricting the supply of oxygen to his brain. 10 seconds. Shinji mentally counted down from his head. It took an average of 9 seconds for someone to be choked into unconsciousness upon initiation of the strangulation. Shinji added 1 more second as a leeway for a total of 10. The brain needed oxygen to function, that was an immutable fact. But Shinji's strangulation method was even more vicious. It constricted the blood flow from reaching Lee's brain. No matter how hard Lee trained his body, he could not train his brain. Even if Shinobi could perform superhuman feats using the mystical energy known as chakra, they were still intrinsically human. That too was an immutable fact. And a human body had its weaknesses that one could exploit if they had sufficient knowledge and technique. Lee struggled intensely, his one free arm first trying with all his might to pry Shinji's arm away from his soft and vulnerable throat. But with Shinji's increased STR from his bull strength perk, his physical prowess had temporarily surpassed Lee's. Failing that, Lee then swung his clenched fist back, punching Shinji repeatedly in the face, but in such an awkward position that left little room to maneuver. These punches could do little damage. As Shinji counted down in his head, Lee's resistance also quickly faded away. The bull-haired Genin's vision started blurring, a blackness closing in from the outside. He could also feel his control over his limbs weakening, his arms and legs growing feeble, as well as an innate panic originating in the deep recesses of his mind, the human instinct of self-preservation. His thoughts petered out, his mind no longer being able to sustain any more mental activity. Before Shinji reached 0 in his mental countdown, Lee had already slumped down in unconsciousness like a rag doll, prompting him to let go of his vice grip around his neck. Lee is not yet at the point where he is strong enough to smash apart ninjutsu and genjutsu like he will be in the future. To the current him, everything other than taijutsu can be considered a critical weakness. It is unfortunate that he chose the wrong opponent. Otherwise, even the current Sajuk would find it hard to deal with Lee. Shinji gently let Lee down before quickly administering medical ninjutsu to first diagnose Lee's condition. The only significant injury was at his back when Shinji poked a hole into it. Other than that, he was actually relatively unscathed. The strangulation that took him out at the end would only have at the same time, a system alert popped up. Quest, Genius of Hard Work, completed. Defeat Rock Lee in a spa, square root. Bonus, knock out Rock Lee, square root. Bonus, force him to remove his weights, square root. Bonus, force him to release his chakra gates, X. Rewards Happy Smiley. Plus 5000 EXP. Bonus 1, plus 5000 EXP. Bonus 2, plus 10 DEX. Bonus 3, new skill, X. You have leveled up. He only took a brief glance at it before dismissing it. Lee. Tenten ran forward to check on her teammate. When she saw Shinji using medical ninjutsu to treat Lee, her first thought was one of concern, then of condemnation. Devious scum. How could you use genjutsu against Lee? She wanted to scream out, but on second thought held her words back. Neither Lee nor Shinji had ever declared that they were only going to be using taijutsu, though Lee didn't really have a choice in that matter. Furthermore, genjutsu was one of the three main branches of the shinobi arts. Using it in a duel that did not forbid it was normal. And as a result, her subsequent impression turned to one of amazement. Seeing him defeat Lee, who she considered to be very strong, was already astonishing to even consider. One had to realize that Shinji's team had only graduated the Shinobi Academy 6 months ago. In other words, they were only official genin for only half a year, whereas Team Guy had been on active duty for 1.5 years. That year more of training and experience could not be discounted, especially for their team that had been one of the few who passed the real graduation exam and was thus selected for special grooming by the village. And on top of that, Shinji was even proficient in medical ninjutsu as well. That was simply unbelievable. Tenten, who idolized Tsunade of the Chunnin, was well aware how extremely difficult medical ninjutsu was. She herself had once thought about embarking on the same path as her idol, being a medic nin who could kick serious ass at the same time. However, once she learned of the enormous complexity that was medical ninjutsu, she realized that it would take years, decades to even begin approaching the realm of Tsunad's expertise. Instead, she settled for what she was most familiar and comfortable with, being a weapons master instead. It was precisely because she was fully aware how difficult medical ninjutsu was that she was so amazed at seeing Shinji using it. Taijutsu, genjutsu and medical ninjutsu, those were only the few of the shinobi arts Shinji chose to reveal, and it was already mind-blowing to her how incredibly versatile he was. Lee then shot up, gasping for air, his eyelids flung open as he took stock of his surroundings. Seeing Shinji and Tenten looking down at him with concern in their eyes, he realized that he had lost. So, I lost in the end, he muttered, more for himself than any others, while his countenance looked downcast. Seeing his dejection, Tenten spoke up in consolation, "Why, you did well, Lee. Just that your opponent used a genjutsu and put you into an illusion. Otherwise, you would have won. So, I lost in the end," Lee muttered, more for himself than any others, while his countenance looked downcast. Seeing his dejection, Tenten spoke up in consolation, "Why, you did well, Lee. Just that your opponent used a genjutsu and put you into an illusion. Otherwise, you would have won." Shinji frowned slightly, at her implication that the only reason he won was because he used a genjutsu. Honestly, he was already holding back quite a bit. Ninjutsu, kenjutsu, and elemental chakra manipulation, all of these he had held back on using. Did she even understand how badly Lee would have been torn up if he applied wind nature chakra to his Shinkyoken? But of course, he also knew Lee was holding back too. Specifically, in the usage of his chakra gates. Lee could open the first 5 gates, and which one provided a tremendous boost in power. If Lee disregarded courtesy and treated the fight as a life or death match, Shinji wasn't sure how he might fare against Lee with all of the 5 chakra gates released. Shinji did not verbally express all these thoughts. Instead, he bowed respectfully at his dejected opponent, "Thank you for your guidance. I have learned a lot from this fight." Lee turned to Shinji, his previously dejected appearance brightening up at Shinji's heartfelt gratitude. Shinji continued, "I look forward to the next time we spar, when you will not hold back like you did this time." The bull-haired Genin's eyes watered upon hearing that. He understood Shinji's intent. His opponent was consoling, but at the same time trying to reassure Lee that the only reason he won was because Lee was still holding back. Simultaneously, Shinji was extending a hand in friendship by promising a next time they would spar. Though Lee might have his own thoughts that Shinji had similarly held back, he could feel the sincerity in Shinji's remarks. "Shinji-kun, you." What an explosion of youth! A sudden loud shout pierced the room as an older version of Lee appeared in the room without anyone even realizing when he had arrived in the first place. "Guy-sensei." Lee quickly stood up but winced from the pain of his still open wound on his back. "Ah, wait, let me heal your injury first." Shinji moved to support him as the unmistakable green glow of medical ninjutsu appeared on his hand. He then hovered his hand over Lee's wound, letting the medical chakra slowly infuse into Lee's injury. "Yo, Lee. I was watching. It was a superb display of youth," Guy announced, before flashing his signature thumbs up and bright smile. "Guy-sensei. But I lost." Lee responded dejectedly. Guy approached and put a hand on his apprentice's shoulder. "Lee. Haven't you understood by now, losing is not a failure. Real failure is when you give up after you have lost." I understand, Guy-sensei. I will never give up," Lee declared with tears in his eyes. Guy nodded firmly, although his eyes briefly glanced towards Shinji's hand covered in the warm green glow of medical ninjutsu. However, what he was looking at was not Shinji's prodigious use of medical ninjutsu. Rather, his mind was thinking back on the taijutsu style Shinji had used against Lee. He was using the Shinkyoken. Asuma, why would teach him that taijutsu? Guy gravely thought to himself. All done. Shinji reported to Lee, as the medical ninjutsu finished healing up his injury. The wound was a shallow one to begin with, since Shinji had purposefully avoided hitting anywhere major. The finger had precisely pierced through some layers of muscle, and not even complicated ones. The large stretch of muscles were easily woven back together by Shinji. Wow, I don't feel any pain at all. That's amazing, Shinji-kun. Lee exclaimed, stretching and flexing his back with wonder. Well, that's the least I could do after doing that to you. Shinji replied, although, I do hope you brought a change of clothes, otherwise you will have to go compete in the Chunnin exams with a hole in your suit. Lee's already big round eyes widened further. I didn't think to bring a change of clothes. What should I do? The exam starts in half an hour, that's more than enough time for me to run home and grab a pair. At this point, Guy laughed and interrupted, don't worry Lee. A good ninja always comes prepared, especially when it comes to this suit of ours. From behind him, he pulled out a pair of the green bodysuit both Lee and he wore. Where did he even pull that out from? Shinji thought to himself. Now I understand how important it is to carry spare suits with me. Guy-sensei, thank you. Lee shouted back, with appreciation and fire in his eyes. Guy laughed even louder before turning to Shinji, how about it, do you want a pair as well? This gorgeous suit is specially made so it is durable, breathes well, always fits perfectly and not to mention incredibly fashionable as well. It is the perfect bodysuit. It is a highly sought after item that is very difficult to get your hands on. I guarantee that once you wear it, you will never want to wear anything else ever again. The inner fashionista in Shinji screamed in horror, but out of curiosity, he casted, observe, on the suit. Mato Guy's bodysuit grade, unique. The perfect bodysuit designed specifically for ease of movement and combat effectiveness. The material it is made of is a special blend of nylon, cotton and a unique fiber doused in chakra in the production process. As a result, it is exceptionally durable despite it being made of such a thin and flexible material. For its practicality, all concept of fashion and aesthetics have been abandoned. It is the epitome of function over form. Durability, 200/200. STR plus 5%. DEX plus 10%. Amazing, it's a percentage increase in stats. I have never seen that in an item before. But it's hideous. An epic battle between two different parts of Shinji's psyche raged on in his mind, similar to when he had previously debated on whether or not he should consume the Legion zombie's heart. One side reasoned that min-maxing was obviously the right decision, and the stat boost it gave was too precious to lose out on simply for as shallow a reason as fashion. While the other side screamed, are you outside of your fucking mind? Look at how tight that suit is. You want to show our cock and balls to the entire world. Just wear other clothes over it then. Oh, yeah, that could work. Really? Well, if it is as amazing as you have made it sound, then I would gratefully receive your gift, Guy-sensei. Shinji responded, as Guy handed over the green bodysuit. Trust me. Once you go green, you will always be keen. Hinata, Shino and Tenten watched their exchange with slack jaws. Shinji-kun is going to wear that. I mean, if anyone could pull it off, it would be Shinji-kun, of course. The Hyuga princess was incredulous for a moment, but she still managed to perform some mental gymnastics that Shinji could do no wrong. There's 3 of them now. Sigh, what a shame. And I thought he was pretty cute too. Tenten sighed and shook her head in pity. Shinji-kun, shouldn't we start heading to the exam venue? We wouldn't want to be late, after all. Hinata spoke up, not wanting Shinji to receive any further adverse influences from garish duo. Ah, sure. Give me 5 minutes, I need to go change first. See you at the exams, Lee. And your team too. Next time we fight, don't hold back, all right? Shinji responded before waving and running off to the toilet to change into the green bodysuit. Does he really like it so much that he is going to change into the suit right away? Tenten stared after Shinji's retreating figure in shock and disbelief. As expected of Shinji-kun. After hearing that the suit would boost his combat performance, he disregards others' opinion and seeks only strength. He is indeed admirable. Lee breathed out in admiration. Yosh, wait for me, Shinji-kun, we will go change together. That's so weird. Can't you phrase it another way? His teammates shot back. Though none of them noticed Hinata's cold gaze on Lee, change, together. Or you green freak, stay away from Shinji-kun. And so the duel between Shinji and Lee concluded, with Shinji adopting the usage of Guy's bodysuit. Though thankfully he wore it underneath his other clothes, much to the disappointment of Lee and Guy and the delight of every other person. Shinji POV*. We stood outside the door leading to the exam room of the first stage of the Chunnin exams. Team Guy had opted to enter after them, possibly due to some weird tension between Hinata and Neji. But I shrugged it off. What came after entering this door was far too important to be bothered about the internal matters of the Hyuga clan. You guys ready? I asked, though it was an unnecessary question to begin with. Of course, Shinji-kun. Shino remained silent while Hinata enthusiastically responded. I put both hands on the door and pushed. Chunnin exam, I am here. That's it, guys. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel, and also make sure you tell me your recommendation in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.